Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. Preview season continues to click off in earnest, and it's all about the NFC South today. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we get things rolling, I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, FanDuel.com. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. Take advantage of your no-sweat bet just in time for football season. If you happen to lose your first wager, up to $1,000, absolutely risk-free. FanDuel will have that right back in your account, whether it's betting NFL preseason, NFL regular season, win totals, you name it. FanDuel has you covered. And of course, want to remind all of you guys as well about the Bet the Board football free roll. $6,000 in cash and prizes available for you. It's the most competitive handicapping contest on the internet, and it's absolutely free. Just go to bettheboardcontest.com and sign up today. Payne, another week of preseason nearly in the books, and we inch ever so close to the start of meaningful football in early September.
Get us here. That's all it's about.
I know you're a college football guy, so I know that's what you're counting it down for week zero of the college football season. But
big game, Florida State to Kane.
I know you'll be glued to the edge of your seat watching the development of the offensive line there in Tallahassee and trying to figure out what you guys have in a starting quarterback. But for those folks that want college football content, obviously not coming here, and we will not have a week zero podcast. Spoiler alert, we'll come back next week with all the big marquee week one matchups. So let's get into the four teams in the NFC South. And as we've done all preview season, it's been about alphabetical order, so we don't show any bias. And we'll start with the Atlanta Falcons, who are listed at 250-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the Super Bowl. They're 30-1 to come out of the division. And when you're looking at their win total, it sits at 4.5, over shaded ever so slightly at minus $1.20. This is a win total that has seen one-way traffic on the under thus far. And when you look at the Falcons, fourth straight losing season on the books, the longest such stretch for this franchise, going all the way back to 1983 to 1990. They didn't win consecutive games once all last season, and the Falcons and Eagles had the dubious distinction of being the only two teams in the league that didn't beat another playoff foe. And of course, what goes up must come down. The Falcons were extremely fortunate, going 7-2 in one-score games. All 7 wins were by a touchdown or less. The problem for Atlanta, they finished with a minus 146 point differential in Payne. For the first time in many, many years, there will be a fresh face under center leading Arthur Smith's offense.
That was the weirdest 7-win team ever. Not very good. Now, give Arthur Smith a little bit of a longer leash, right? Like, he didn't have much to work with. I don't think there's any debating that. He also wasn't really running the most optimal offense either, and I think play calling left a little bit to be desired, and I don't really want to be play calling guy, but it's very rare that after a handful of games and the talent that Smith had, that local beat writers would call into question the play calling and some of the ineptitude offensively, especially with situational football. But that happened last year. And you can see why in some of the numbers. Offensive line was horrific as well, 29th in run block win rate, dead last in power success rate. That unit was arguably the worst across the board. Also top 25 in runs that got stuffed at or behind the line of scrimmage. And what's interesting is with some of that run block data that you have at your fingertips, and you would hope that the coach would also have that data, especially with a multi-billion-dollar organization. you look at some of these numbers, right? And even like the running back room, right? You basically have a converted special teams player as your lead running back, and then you do have a veteran quarterback quarterback who's quite savvy, and he's pounding the cap for $27 million. With all those things said, Arthur Smith chose to be the second most run-heavy team on first down. It was as if he was still in Tennessee, he still had Derrick Henry, still had this, plus offensive run blocking line at his disposal. It just wasn't the case. And you look at some of these numbers for Matt Ryan's career, you think, hey, let's put this guy in a little bit better position to succeed. Let's use a little bit more play action. And I get that some of these numbers with play action are, with Kyle Shanahan at the helm, and Atlanta was certainly ahead of the times with how efficient and helpful play action could be to an offense. But even Matt Ryan's career splits, drastically different and better throwing with play action. Arthur Smith had Matt Ryan throw with play action at just the 12th highest rate. With his career splits, he should have been one of the league's leaders. 28% wasn't enough. So you look at some of the things Arthur Smith was doing, and it didn't make a ton of sense. Now, as we kind of project ahead and you listen to Arthur Smith this offseason, and also seeing the quarterbacks on the roster that are both new and mobile, as you kind of alluded to there, I would expect substantial changes. And Smith flat out said in a local interview recently, the offense is going to look different. When you're working with a veteran quarterback, we put a lot of new schemes and plays and throw a bunch on his plate. But there's things Marcus and Desmond do that can help you in the run game. So you'll see us move the quarterback more. You're certainly going to need to account for the quarterback in the run game. Hopefully that gives us an edge. That's smart, right? It makes a lot of sense to me. When your offensive line has trouble protecting and you surrendered a 40% pressure rate last season, let's get the mobile quarterback on the move, right? Rollouts, boots, designed runs, RPOs, scrambles, you name it. I think that's probably smart. And I expect the Falcons' offensive line to continue to have questions. They really didn't do much to fortify that sector of the roster. You have Chris Lindstrom. He's damn good. Better as a run blocker than pass protector. The data shows, right, defenses can scheme around one good offensive lineman. Jake Matthews is the second best offensive lineman the Falcons have. He graded out the 27th best at his position among 55 tackles that played at least 600 snaps. So even he's not elite. But past those two, looks like Elijah Wilkinson at guard, Hennessy at center, and Caleb McGarry at right tackle. In 5 seasons, Elijah Wilkinson's played nearly 2,000 snaps. Never had a positive pass blocking grade. Caleb McGarry, you have to ask how he's a starting tackle in this league heading into year 4. It's that bad. And then you look at some of the weapons. Those are interesting. So I think you see a slight uptick there. I know Russell Gage is gone, but I think Kyle Pitts in year 2, just a matchup nightmare for any defense, right? You can stick him outside. You can stick him in the slot or even inline. He surprised me last year as a pass blocker. You look at Pitts, one of 4 tight ends to average more than 2 yards per route run. Pitts was 6th in EPA for tight ends. I believe we're higher on Drake London than others. Some question marks with speed and separation quickness, but he has a lot of Mike Evans traits in him, and he's won a lot of camp battles so far against Casey Hayward and AJ Terrell. You just look at London. He's got a knack for getting open, finding spaces and zones. He's just savvy. He's very polished. Former basketball player, always seems to kind of have the right angle on the ball. He can high point the ball. His body positioning is elite. So I think that's a nice tandem there. You still have Cordarrelle Patterson, who had nearly 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns last season. Bottom line, when I look at this offense, right, Arthur Smith has to be better. I think the verdict's still out on that. We didn't really believe Arthur Smith was the best candidate at the time, but I think we mentioned this, right? His father and Arthur Blank are business buddies. So that's kind of how that unfolded. I think you just need better self-scouting, right? Play calling, situational football needs to be better in year 2 with more weapons. You can't be 26th in early down efficiency and 25th in the red zone. These things are interesting because, when you look at Atlanta this year, you have to improve because the schedule, my God, I don't know what happened, but Atlanta just got smacked in the face. The Falcons are projected to play the most difficult schedule of defenses, the most difficult schedule of run defenses. And if you can't run and you have quarterbacks with questionable arm talent or not quite there yet as a polished passer, right, with Desmond Ridder, if you're going to be predictable on first down runs and you're going against the most efficient running schedule of defenses, it's just going to put a lot of pressure on your quarterback. So that makes me nervous about this offense, Todd.
Is there reason to be optimistic that Atlanta's heading in the right direction? And when you look at the season in a nutshell, talking about the level of complexity that they're going to face in opposing defenses, Marcus Mariota's biggest knock amongst many is that he's not overly durable. How long do you think it would take Arthur Smith to at least go to Desmond Ridder if the Falcons are going to have a chance to draft in the top 5 again, to figure out if Ridder is going to be that guy, so rather than potentially passing on a franchise-changing first-round quarterback should one fall to them in the draft next year?
This is a business, right?
Sure is.
Arthur Smith's had no problem benching Marcus Mariota once already for a guy named Ryan Tannehill. So that's the interesting element here is, yes, Arthur Smith threw Marcus Mariota a lifeline to give him one more crack at being a starting quarterback in this NFL, and Marcus Mariota took it. But let's not forget Arthur Smith also benched this guy. So the leash, I think, is pretty short.
It's probably the way you have to do things. If Marcus isn't going to get you where you need to go, see what you have in Desmond Ridder and figure things out. A team, obviously, as we mentioned at the top, that does not have extremely high expectations. And for all of the questions that we have about this team offensively, defensively, there's not a whole lot of optimism either. You're talking about adding a couple of players in Casey Hayward and Lorenzo Carter. They go out and they address one potential need in the draft. You lose one of your top tacklers, as we talked about in the preview of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Foyase Olukin. But you're talking again about a Falcons defense that had that had 18 sacks, and it was 11 worse than the second to last team in that department a season ago. The fewest pressures per PFF, and they were dead last in sack rate at only 3% of dropbacks. No player had more than 4.5 sacks on this Falcons roster, and if you remove Dante Fowler, who's no longer with the team, no player had more than 2. I mean, things were pretty bleak for this Atlanta team defensively, other than a player that you mentioned in A.J. Terrell, who's arguably their best in the secondary.
Dean Pease turns 73 in a couple weeks. And I don't know if you saw this, but he was pretty excitable in a recent presser. He yelled to the clouds, and beat reporters were also there, that we've been a top 10 defense one time out of the last 20 years. That's bullshit is over. Sorry, I'm getting fired up today, but I'm tired of this crap. We're going to change the culture on defense and turn this freaking place around. People are going to start talking about the Atlanta defense like they did Baltimore and New England.
God bless.
It's going to be the same
God
shit
bless
around
you, Dean.
here.
God bless you.
I like Dean Pease. He's well respected. When you dig into his defenses, you do start to wonder how much of it he's responsible for. That's a different discussion for a different day. But I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off here. Dean, the Falcons defense is now going to finish top 10 once in the last 21 years because it ain't happening this year. Okay. The offenses Atlanta plays goes from the 5th easiest last season to a projected top 10 schedule this season. And against the 5th easiest schedule last year, Atlanta finished 28th in early down defense. So even if you make incremental improvement this year with players having better knowledge of the scheme in year 2, and you have a tiny talent infusion, does it actually show with the gap in schedule strength widening so large? Probably not, you know? I think about the units on Atlanta's defense. The defensive line for the Falcons could be one of the weakest in the NFL. Surely graded out the worst last season. 26th or worse in both run stop win rate and pass rush win rate. Grady Jarrett, obviously one of the best interior linemen in the league, but the transition to Peace's system did not go well. You could see that in some of the data. It was his second worst season as a pro, finished 33rd in pressure rate among qualifying defensive tackles. Would be nice if Marlon Davidson played to the draft status in year 3, but he only played 23% of snaps last season because of poor play. You try to figure out where Atlanta gets pressure from, and it appears they're going to be reliant on a rookie, Arnold Ebiketie. Like, I like the potential and upside, but that's a lot to ask in year 1. You bring in Lorenzo Carter, who's this athletic freak. He's supposed to bring pressure off the edge, but you look through 4 seasons, he's been an above-average outside linebacker whose best attribute has been in coverage, not getting pressure. The second rounder from last year, Gundaje, delivered a 4% pressure rate on pass rush snaps last season. I just don't see a ton here. Linebacker group was not great. I love Deion Jones, right? One of the best 3-down backers. The problem is he's on the PUP, and apparently Jones is getting close to coming off the PUP. You He was on the field for the first time, I believe it was Thursday the 18th. But if you listen to some of the reports coming out of there are some rumors swirling that the Falcons are trying to trade Deion Jones. There's been a clash in personality, and the relationship isn't great with the new regime. Let's see how that unfolds. I will give Dean Pease credit. I think the Falcons' corners, which you hinted at there, Todd, are very good. That's important when you're running a nickel-based scheme. 73% of the Falcons' defensive snaps were played with 5 defensive backs. A.J. Terrell, proving all the draft day cynics wrong. I think we thought he was a little bit overdrafted. He allowed 200 receiving yards when in coverage for the entire season last year. Terrell was thrown at 66 times and only allowed 29 to be caught. That's less than a 44% catch rate. That was best in the league. Passes thrown into Terrell's coverage generated a 47 pass rank. That was also the best mark among qualifying corners. I like Casey Hayward more than most. He does turn 33 in a couple of weeks, but he's coming off another great season. He returned to his 2018 form last year, allowed less than 51% of targets to be caught. No projected starting cornerback tandem allowed less receiving yards than Terrell and Hayward when targeted last year. I also like D. Alford. Supposedly he's coming on. He was a CFL standout, had a great camp, should be a nice piece the Falcons secondary has past Terrell and Hayward. You still have Isaiah Oliver, who's been a reliable slot corner. Don't love the safeties, though, and that could ultimately kind of hinder Atlanta's secondary from grading out as well as it should. But you mentioned at the very top that Atlanta's been getting faded by professional bettors. You are correct, right? Under 5 pretty much was taken off the board by pros, and you're now looking at 4.5 pretty much across the board.
Hey, it's all about finding small victories this season if you're the Atlanta Falcons. They could be few and far between. Maybe you find yourself rooting for an 0-17 campaign. From the Atlanta Falcons to maybe one of the more intriguing teams, not just in the division, but in the entire NFC, that, of course, being the Carolina Panthers, who are 100-1 long shots at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the Lombardi Trophy, 15-1 to finish atop the NFC South. And when you're looking at their win total, 6.5 shaded to the under. You have to lay $1.25 to get involved there. And when you look at Carolina and the way that this franchise has trended in Charlotte since David Tepper has taken over, not exactly all roses by any stretch of the imagination. 22-43 in 65 games, 0 winning seasons, 0 playoff appearances. And when you look at Carolina last year, they thought they had the answer in Sam Darnold after they started off the campaign with 3 straight victories. They end up going 2-12 over their final 14 games. It was actually the worst record in the National Football League over that span. Crazily enough, as we know about the volatility at head coach, Matt Rule has become the longest tenured head coach in the entire NFC South, and we'll see if the magical third year can pay dividends in Charlotte the same way Rule was able to get the most out of his Baylor Bears, and before that, the Temple Owls. Payne, of course, when you look at Carolina, this defense, probably a little bit overrated, and we'll get to them in a minute, but the reality of things in Charlotte was that this offense was downright awful and inefficient for extended stretches. Out goes Sam Darnold to the backup role. In comes Baker Mayfield, and I'm sure Panthers fans can only hope that Christian McCaffrey can stay on the football field for at least 15 games.
I'm with you in terms of intrigue with Carolina. Somehow, an uninteresting team projected to finish third in its own division is totally consuming. There are just so many moving parts that come with massive variance and wide-ranging possibilities that I've kind of been sucked down the Carolina Panthers wormhole. And you look at Ben McAdoo, new Panthers OC. We bashed him as the Giants head coach, I think, along with other informed analysts, and we were right. He was horrific. But in his defense,
we were right. He was terrible.
At no level had he ever been a head coach, not in high school, college, or the NFL prior to the Giants giving him that job. And then McAdoo also was from the Mike McCarthy coaching tree, which nobody really respects anymore. In saying all that, strictly as an offensive coordinator, Ben McAdoo's first time calling plays in that role was for the Giants in 2014. The Giants did finish 15th in offensive efficiency against a top 10 schedule of defenses that season. In 2013, the year before McAdoo got there, the Giants finished 30th in offensive efficiency against the 6th easiest schedule of defenses. So maybe we see this, uptick that McAdoo facilitates in year one, and you get that leap. Maybe Carolina, when you look at them, as much as I respect Joe Brady, the clear element there was like him and Matt Rule butted heads, did not get along. And from what I'm being told inside the Carolina organization, the transition from Brady to McAdoo has been fantastic. The vibe within those walls is that McAdoo's a really good offensive coordinator, that he can handle everything being thrown at him and adjust on the fly. And because of that, Matt Rule trusts McAdoo. And there's been this divide between offense and defense. And Matt Rule isn't micromanaging the offense anymore. And he doesn't have to juggle 20 different responsibilities. And because of that, right, like Tepper, you have your GM, Scott Fitterer, Matt Rule, they feel better about where things stand heading into this season. Now, over the last 96 hours, it leaked that Baker Mayfield won the starting job. Matt Rule came out and refuted that in the postgame presser Friday after the Patriots game. But I think that's a good assumption, right? And clearly the news leaked from someone within the Panthers organization, and I've seen enough data to think Mayfield should start over Darnold comfortably. And the interesting thing here about Mayfield is I found a quote from 2018. It was Ben McAdoo's final season with the Giants. I believe 2017 was his final year. So he'd at least scouted the 2018 quarterback class thinking he might be retained. And McAdoo, obviously after being relieved of his duties with the Giants, did a few interviews, and he was asked about the crop of quarterbacks that year and Baker Mayfield specifically. And Ben McAdoo said, "I don't see a lot of pro-style football in Mayfield's college tape. And if you're short, you have to be able to make up for it some way, somehow. And personality doesn't do that. I didn't think he was a great athlete. This guy is kind of like a pocket quarterback that is short and with small hands, and that's what I worry about." Let's see how this plays out. But the McAdoo-Mayfield relationship is certainly going to be an interesting one to monitor. They are both in desperation mode and need each other. I think that's pretty clear. And if you look at Mayfield before his injury-riddled season last year, he was solid. Now, you do have to put that solid play in context of Cleveland had an elite offensive line. They were extremely efficient running it. Those are clear quarterback enhancers. But you go back to 2020, Baker graded out the 8th best passer among quarterbacks with at least 400 dropbacks. His adjusted accuracy approached 77%. In snaps where OBJ wasn't on the field, Baker was 7th in EPA per attempt in 2020. So there was some strides made there. Carolina, you look at them this year, I think you're going to get improved offensive line play in front of Baker. Last season, they allowed pressures in under 2.5 seconds at the 9th highest rate and finished 29th in pass block win rate. There is potential for a surge. You look at some of the talent that's been added. You think about Taylor Moton. He's a fine right tackle, graded out the 4th best right tackle last season, 3rd best in 2020. You go out and you draft Icky with the 6th pick, won the left tackle job in the last 4 or 5 days. He's an elite run blocker. If he can be half as good as a pass blocker, the Panthers struck gold there. Then you bring in Brady Christensen, 3rd round tackle from the 2021 class. Nice depth piece at tackle, or they may try him at guard. The floor was raised on the interior. You brought in Bradley Bozeman, the former Bama interior lineman. He was drafted in 2018. Comes off a fantastic season with Baltimore after 1,100 plus snaps. 4th best blocking center. Austin Colbert comes over from the Super Bowl champion Rams on a $35 million deal. He's been a plus-level guard back-to-back seasons. And you look at why the offensive line's important past the obvious, right? Baker Mayfield has massive splits when pressured versus kept clean. Most quarterbacks do, but the dichotomy is like the size of the Grand Canyon for Baker Mayfield when you look over his career. And in that 2020 season alone, which is one of his best, Mayfield's passer rating was nearly 64 points higher when kept clean. So I think the improved offensive line is going to help. You look at some of the weapons, right? DJ Moore has the potential to take that next step and be elite. He's kind of got that Terry McLaurin syndrome where they've both been fantastic despite horrific quarterback play, and neither of them has bitched. So that's interesting. I think he can surge a little bit here. Robbie Anderson, if he can return to the 2020 form, that'd be nice. There was a ton of hype around Terrace Marshall last year, ended up with 0.5 yards per route run. That's, yuck, bad. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey's back. We know his impact as a runner, but as a pass catcher, he is unmatched. 2.9 yards per route run from the running back position in 7 games last season. Has the ability to be the safety valve and help the offensive line. I think that's one of the most underrated aspects when you think about running backs catching passes. How do they help quarterbacks? How do they help an offensive line? And if you look at CMC in games that he didn't play, the Panthers' sack rate increased 7.3%. So that's something to think about, right? We got a guy we can just dump it off too quickly when pressure comes. Panthers also face an easier schedule of passing defenses this season, which is nice. Carolina goes from the third toughest schedule of passing defenses to an average schedule. So you think about the improved O-line, CMC back as the safety valve. I don't think Carolina is going to finish minus 13 in turnover margin again. And here's kind of the cold hard facts. Regardless of what you think of Baker Mayfield, it is hard to be any worse than dead last in EPA per pass, dead last in team completion percentage, 31st in touchdown rate, 31st in yards per pass attempt, and 31st in interception rate. That was the collective Carolina quarterback room and what they produced last season.
Yeah, it was nothing to write home about by any stretch of the imagination. And if you're already at rock bottom, you can't fall through the basement, at least last time I checked. To your point, talking about DJ Moore, Payne, only Stephon Diggs and Travis Kelce have 1,000+ receiving yards in each of the last 3 seasons. Obviously, fantasy owners know all too well DJ Moore comes up short in the touchdown department, as he's yet to have more than 4 in a season. Had just 5 catches in the red zone last year, placed him outside the top 80, but obviously that was partially a byproduct of Carolina not spending an inordinate amount of time there. You'd like to think that Ben McAdoo knows where his best weapon is in the passing attack, and that him and Baker Mayfield are able to get on the same page sooner rather than later. As far as this team defensively, they were extremely healthy last year, and obviously if there's a little bit of a decline there, you do begin to worry about it. Carolina looked great when they beat up on lightweights early in the year, but they showed signs of wear and tear, especially over the second half of the season when they stepped up in class. They made a couple of additions this offseason. You bring in Dante Jackson, Xavier Woods, and Matt Ioannidis. You do lose Stephon Gilmore, who we talked about at great length as a new member of the Indianapolis Colts. Hassan Reddick was a key contributor in the pass rush, and Daquan Jones. When you try and assess Carolina and what we can expect from them on the defensive side, I look from the back all the way in, and obviously there's reason for optimism, especially in the secondary, specifically at the safety position.
You know, I think you kind of are leading us the right way in that this is a really tough defense to gauge, and for multiple reasons. Like, there was this massive gap in production differential based on the level of offensive competition. There's also so many young guys with the slew of draft capital spent in the Matt Rule era that you're just waiting for the light to turn on for so many of those young guys. Here's what we know, and you hit it perfectly. Carolina's defense started out red hot. Weeks 1 through 10, they were number 2 in EPA per play allowed. Much of that success over that sample was beating up on rookies like Zach Wilson and Davis Mills. You had Jameis Winston during a week the Saints got hammered by the Big C and was missing lots of players and coaches. You beat a backup in Colt McCoy and then a miserable Falcons team with a first-time head coach. After their final win in Week 10, Carolina's defense fell off a cliff. From Week 11 onward, Carolina finished 31st in EPA per play allowed. Carolina didn't win a game against an offense that finished above league average in adjusted offensive efficiency and started its number 1 quarterback. And that's, something to think about here if there's not material upgrades in talent, because Carolina goes from playing the 4th easiest schedule of offenses last season to an above average schedule this season. You mentioned some of the young guys in the back, but I think the front 7 is the area where we have some questions. They stayed extremely healthy last season, finished 2nd as a unit in pass rush win rate. Does that regress if health regresses? But you look at some of the individual grades and some of the tape from guys that I really respect breaking down film. They're still not playing to their potential, even though, they finished 2nd in pass rush win, right? Derek Brown was the 8th pick in 2020. In 2 seasons, he's hit the opposing quarterback 15 times and has been moved in the ground game. Gross Matos, in 2 seasons, has generated a 7% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. Not what you expect from 2 guys that were supposed to be, cornerstone pieces and change the defensive culture and trajectory. Brian Burns, love him to death. One-trick pony, right? If he's not getting pressure, he's a liability. Now, fortunately, Burns produced a 12% pressure rate on pass rush snaps over his entire career, and that's likely why he's going to get paid. Love the addition of Matt Ioannidis, top 20 in pressure rate at the D-tackle position last season. Jeremy Chin made a massive year 2 leap, specifically in his ability to cover. We know how versatile he is, can play in the slot, can play in the box, can get after the quarterback, but when he was in coverage, that's where we saw a pretty big leap, which is nice in a passing league, right? J.C. Horn's going to be damn good. Rookie season was cut short, so getting him back for a full season's awesome. He does have elite traits, and when you look, even in his short time on the field, 95 coverage snaps as a rookie, gave up 1 reception for 8 yards. Quarterbacks refused to target him. Okay, so that is a huge boost to the defense. Coaching staff claims that the 9th overall pick, C.J. Henderson from a few years back, has turned the corner and had a fantastic
I've
camp.
heard this so many times already.
Yes, I know. But, you start to look at this young talent, right? Like, does the light eventually come on? And sometimes it does take, 2, 3, 4 years. But you just look across the board, right? There's just this slew of young talent. If they can all kind of come together simultaneously, right? Maybe Phil Snow has something here, but it does make me nervous. This defense crapped the bed against better offenses last season, and now we're projecting a significant uptick in competition. But again, there's room for improvement here just based on how young some of these guys are. And God forbid you get 4 or 5 of them to play, their best season at the same time. Could be onto something.
When you look at Carolina, and we'll leave it on this, and a total encompassing snapshot, do you feel that they've done themselves a disservice constantly chasing after veteran quarterbacks on the scrap heap more so than maybe looking to go, hey, look, we're going to scrap our, ability or want to be competitive. We're just going to draft a guy and we're going to endure inevitable growing pains. Because obviously Baker Mayfield, if he goes out there and performs, is still on the final year of his deal. And I'm not sure you're going to commit to him with franchise-changing money, even if this team were to win, 9 to 10 games potentially if everything broke the right way.
Yeah, I think that process was kind of bizarre. You have a new owner in Tepper and he's bringing in a new coach. And the hope is, at least in my mind, right, you're building for continued success and longevity, and you're not trying to just hit the lotto playing penny slots, right? Like I didn't understand the philosophy. Find your franchise quarterback, build around him. They had a ton of early round picks, right? Like how many first round picks did they have in the top 10? Nearly every year, right? Yep. The first couple of years they picked, and you don't come away with someone. Now I understand the process of, we think Sam Darnold has potential. We know how high he was picked. We think Adam Gase was a dud. We can turn this guy around, and that's part of the egos coaches do have, right? They think in their system, under their tutelage, we can get the most out of this guy. We know he's talented. It just didn't happen. Baker Mayfield's an interesting story. I would have drafted an early round quarterback for sure, but this was always the place that made sense. Remember we talked in the offseason that Seattle might go get Baker Mayfield. Like, this makes no freaking sense. Why would you want a quarterback that's potentially going to win you 8 or 9 games and you lose out on a Stroud? Carolina, those guys are on the hot seat. Go get a guy that's actually competent and get you to potentially 8 or 9 wins. I know the win total set at 6.5, but you can exceed that because there's going to be a team in this level of 6.5, 7 wins that does make a leap in the NFC. Try to keep your job. And that's ultimately what this staff is trying to do.
Carolina did trade up for a quarterback in this year's draft, Matt Corral in the 3rd round, who will now be shelved for the entire season as he unfortunately suffered a Liz Frank fracture. So anyone that thought he was going to be the face of the franchise going forward is going to have to wait a little while to see as Matt Rule and company try and salvage their jobs. 2 teams down, 2 teams to go, but want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, FanDuel.com. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. Take advantage of your no sweat bet up to $1,000. And also be sure to sign up for the Bet the Board football free roll. $6,000 in cash and prizes, and arguably the most beautiful trophy in all of sports. BetTheBoardContest.com. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers, you want bragging rights to win this thing. And Payne, we go from 2 teams projected to be on the bottom of the totem pole in the division to the 2 teams that people have high expectations for, at least relatively speaking, amongst this division. And we'll start with the New Orleans Saints, who see their Super Bowl odds at 40-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook. They're 3-1 to win the division, and their win total sits at 8.5, shaded to the under at minus $1.25. The reality of things for the team hailing from the Big Easy, they can't possibly be ravaged by injuries and the Big C at the same rate as we saw last year. But obviously, life in New Orleans is going to look significantly different as under Sean Payton, I should say, the Saints own the fourth best winning percentage in the entire NFL at a little better than 61% and earned their only Super Bowl appearance and win in franchise history back in 2009. In steps Dennis Allen, promoted from defensive coordinator to head coach, and the last time we saw him in this kind of role, he compiled a record of 8-28 atop the pecking order of the now Las Vegas Raiders. When you're looking at this New Orleans Saints team, Jameis Winston signed to a 2-year deal. We know he has put his fingerprints all over what this offense will look like. Some weapons to be excited about, but at the same time, you do begin to wonder what life without Sean Payton will look like for this team, especially on the offensive side.
And that's probably, the best place to start. Let's kind of pause on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball momentarily and kind of think about what's going on here this offseason, because it's really fascinating for the Saints. Like, we all thought salary cap, player age, and without this, clearly defined franchise quarterback, it was reasonable to assume the Saints would start their rebuild. And then all of a sudden this summer, they looked around. It was like, John Travolta in Pulp Fiction, and said to themselves, where is everybody here, right? The Packers couldn't win the last 3 seasons with a better roster than they have now. 49ers are trending towards starting an FCS quarterback. And Tom Brady just retired. And the NFC is a goddamn mess. That's basically the thought process. And then all of a sudden they got a break. NFL salary cap increased year over year by nearly $26 million. Thank you, sports bettors, for that, by the way. That helps, right? And now let's see if we can restructure some of our clunky contracts. And sure enough, Taysom Hill, Demario Davis, Malcolm Jenkins, right, Bradley Roby, they were all willing to kind of restructure their deals and kind of create $30 million in cap space. And now all of a sudden, like, we're looking at this, like, we promoted Dennis Allen to head coach for continuity, regardless of what transpired there. With the Raiders, we got below market deals done with Jarvis Landry and Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May, and Michael Thomas did heal quicker than we thought, although I just saw he got
he's dinged up again.
Dinged with a hamstring injury.
Yeah, we may never see him again.
Right, it doesn't appear like Alvin Kamara is going to be suspended this season. It looks like we've hit a home run with Olave and Penning in the draft, and it's like, boom, like, let's give this thing another run. And it's wild to see how it played out and how the organizational mindset shifted in a few short months. And because of that, right, we've seen the Saints open at 7.5 wins early this summer, now out to 8.5, mostly because of this renewed buy-in to winning, which is completely different than any of us thought, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, this was a team that, to your point, we thought they were going to be stuck in salary cap hell, purgatory, whatever you want to use. But we've seen over the years that if you get creative, you can find unique ways to remain competitive. They've settled on a quarterback, and I'm not sure he's going to be the franchise-changing talent that when he was drafted number 1 overall by the Bucs, a lot of people thought he could be. But when we saw Jameis Winston out there last year, I mean, this was a Saints team that through their first 7 games was 5-2. They showed some playmaking potential, and you highlighted a couple of the key cogs they brought in to give them a little bit more weaponry, and a team that still, in my opinion, has been undersold defensively for what they've been able to accomplish over the last couple of years, because when Drew Brees was at his peak, it was, we're going to win with offense and the defense just has to be average. That could be anything but the case going forward, with the defense potentially being better than what this team will bring offensively.
That's the interesting debate. I just, we break down defense on this podcast, and we can get there in a minute, but just with the way the league's trending, offense is just so much more important. It really is. It's difficult, I think, for a lot of people to understand how much more offense equates to winning. And I look at the Saints, right? And before we get to kind of Jameis and some of those offensive pieces, you look at Pete Carmichael, who is the new offensive coordinator. Been with the Saints since 2006. He was Sean Payton's right-hand man, one of the few brain trusts, right, that Payton wanted around him at all times. We have seen Carmichael put game plans together. He helped make in-game adjustments, and we've seen over the years that Carmichael's had a chance to not just build the offense during the week, but he's called plays on game day. You go back to 2011, Sean Payton broke his leg. He was forced into the box, and Carmichael called plays during that stretch. And in the first game, Saints offense hung 62 points in 557 yards. And you look over that 6-game stretch where Pete called plays as Payton was recovering from the broken leg, Saints averaged 477 yards of offense in 5 of those 6 games. In 2012, Payton was suspended for the entire season. Saints defense turned into a dumpster fire, but with Carmichael running the offense, Saints averaged 411 yards per game, 29 points per game. 8 times the Saints scored 30 points. That's a lot in 2012, right? The game was played a little bit differently a decade ago. Now, the schedule-adjusted efficiency in 2012 for the Saints did dip a touch, 9th best. The year prior, it was 2nd, and the year after, it was 5th. So with Carmichael and in between there, we did see a little bit of a dip. And then in 2016, Payton let Pete call plays the first 10 games, trying to help get him a head coaching job. Saints averaged 474 yards of offense. 5 times in 10 games, the offense hung more than 30 points. So, for me, there's few in the world that are going to match Sean Payton's offensive chops, but I don't envision Pete Carmichael being like the Elmer Fudd of offense here. I don't see that being the case. I'm interested to see if he has more trust in Jameis Winston than Sean Payton did. We heard rumblings during Combine Week last year that Sean Payton was scared of Jameis making a mistake even after the LASIK surgery. And if you're kind of in the space, Sean Payton has a tendency in Indianapolis to speak a bunch as he's intoxicated at the bar. And you obtain some decent information about the Saints there every year. You basically just put a guy in a plane, head to the bar, and let him overhear what Sean's saying as he's intoxicated. But we saw that kind of carry over into the season. And without Drew Brees, Sean Payton changed the way he called the Saints offense. Payton cut back pass attempts on early downs, specifically on first down in the first half, and you look how much that hindered the early down efficiency and enhanced the difficulty on third downs, and that ultimately crushed third down conversion rates for the Saints. With Jameis under center, 6.9 yards to go on third down was the average distance the first 3 quarters. That was longer than the NFL average. And then, it just a huge change from when Drew Brees was operating the offense a year prior when the Saints had the shortest third down distance to go. You look at what that increase of third down distance did with Winston under center. New Orleans only converted 37% of those third downs the first 3 quarters, 9th worst in the league. Jameis also held on to the ball forever. Second longest time to throw among qualifying quarterbacks at 3.1 seconds.
So. You've seen all the drills that Jameis does in the offseason. It's tapping the ball, it's looking around, it's bands, it's Bosu balls. I mean, you can understand why he holds onto the ball for 7 seconds in the pocket every time he drops back.
Yeah, you don't know if it's not fully understanding a complex offense in one offseason, which is very possible, or it's his passion for hunting deep balls didn't kind of leave the internal system there. Regardless of which it was, it's probably a combination of both. He held on to the ball forever. Drew Brees the year prior, his release time was 2.4 seconds. You add the longer throw time with the second most injured offense in the NFL last season, and Winston was pressured at a 16% higher rate than Drew Brees in 2020. He was sacked, Winston that is, on 8.5% of his dropbacks. That's a monster number, and that basically crushed the Saints' offensive efficiency in a major way. On any drive Winston took a single sack, the Saints finished 31st in yards per drive. Winston also saw a 42-point dip in passer rating when pressured. That was one of the 3 largest clean pocket to under pressure contrasts among qualifying quarterbacks. I think we also have to monitor that situation. He's dealing with a foot sprain that he suffered on August 8th. Winston hasn't done anything more than a walkthrough since then. He's missing some valuable reps right now. Now, I expect him to be fine for the season, but this is clearly a time where you would hope to have Jameis Winston out there. Now, some real positives heading into the season. On paper, the Saints offense has far more talent than last season. Kamara was returning from a knee injury. He claims he feels better. We mentioned Michael Thomas didn't play a single snap. He will play a snap this season, right? Chris Olave, Jarvis Landry are adding to the weaponry. Offense should see positive health regression, as I mentioned, finished second most injured. The Saints had 4 different quarterbacks last year attempt 20 or more passes. They also go from facing one of the 5 most difficult schedules of passing defenses to the 10th easiest this season. So I think the hope here, Todd, just kind of overarching, is the drop-off from Payton to Carmichael is small enough that the increase in talent and health plus a dip in schedule strength leads to improvement for the Saints offense.
If Michael Thomas can't go or contribute like a lot of people hope he can, getting back to the ridiculous levels we saw over the course of his first 4 seasons, do you feel that Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave?
That's not possible. He's not going back to who he was.
No. But I'm saying even if he can't come in and contribute as a wide receiver 1, do you feel that Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave can soften that blow? Clearly, it's now for New Orleans. It's all about the sum of the parts rather than just one individual being the true alpha in the room.
That's why the parts are interesting. So it's a hamstring injury. Let's not go nuts about that.
No, for sure.
We did see some reports about Michael Thomas initially when he came back. The thing with Michael Thomas's injury, and you speak to a lot of doctors, the surgery was on the inside of the ankle, which is the far more difficult place to have that surgery. And when you look at how receivers cut, there was a reason when he first came back and you saw the routes he was running, everything was rounded off. And so that led a lot of the doctors to be like, man, I don't know if he ever returns to form. It's possible he never does. The production was through the roof. He's, older now, probably not as healthy. But the other weapons there, you think even Taysom Hill. We don't like him as a quarterback, but now that you have a quarterback, maybe he becomes the full-time tight end. Troutman got injured last year. He's back. You have Olave, who looks like a great deep threat, and he meshes. His style meshes very well with Jameis Winston, who wants to push the ball down the field. And then you do have Jarvis Landry underneath. So you can absorb the Michael Thomas blow this season. But ultimately, regardless if he's not 100% healthy, doesn't return to form, you're going to get more than a snap out of him, which means uptick for Michael Thomas,
All right, well, I mean, since you told us defense doesn't matter, we should be able to address this side of the ball in about 12 seconds.
Way to put words in my mouth.
I know. You knew exactly how I was going to do that. Come on, you set yourself up perfectly for it. When you look at New Orleans defensively, they give up less than 20 points per game last year and well under 100 yards rushing. Both were the 4th fewest in the National Football League. In each of their last 5 games, the Saints' defense was stingy, held teams to under 21 points, and obviously shut out Tom Brady at home for the first time in his career. The Saints reaped the benefits in the win column, going 4-1 during that stretch. But so much of New Orleans' success defensively was attributed to being elite and preventing touchdowns in the red zone. That number, Payne, probably not sustainable this year. There obviously is a lot of continuity and pieces to like, but what do you look at from this Saints defense going forward?
I mean, I think Dennis Allen's an elite defensive mind. Don't know what that means as a head coach. I think the hope is that with more on his plate now, New Orleans doesn't take a step back defensively. And you think about what's gone on here. It's all about continuity. That's the theme. So Dennis Allen promoted Ryan Nielsen and Chris Richard from within as co-defensive coordinators. I like the top line talent here. Some questions about depth at linebacker past Tamaro Davis and on the interior of the defensive line. It'll be interesting to see if there's a reunion with Malcolm Brown. I know he was just cut. But the starting 11 has serious juice. Top 5 leaders in pressure rate return. Defensive line in general has just, real horses. You look at Cam Jordan. The guy's just Mr. Reliable. He's a Hall of Famer for sure. He's missed 2 games in 11 seasons. Grayed out the 4th best defensive end in the league over the last 5 seasons. You have David Onyemata. Real force inside, 5th in pressure rate. Contract year for him. Shai Tuttle graded out the 10th best run-stopping defensive tackle among big fellas with at least 450 snaps. Also in a contract year. Marcus Davenport had his best season last year on more than 15% of defensive snaps. Davenport had a pressure or a run stop. Would be nice to have him for a full season. He has missed 17 games in 4 years, so hopefully Cam Jordan can kind of wear off on him and he can complete a season. Then you have Peyton Turner, right? The 28th pick last year. Only played 144 snaps as a rookie, but super productive snaps. He created a pressure or run stop on 14% of snaps, so I would expect to see an increase in snap rate for Turner. That's a really nice defensive line. We know Marshawn Lattimore's really confident also about this defense. He sent out a tweet recently insinuating they'll be dominant again, and the tweet happened to come around the same time that Aaron Rodgers was criticizing his receivers for not being reliable after a joint scrimmage. The scrimmage was against the Saints defense. So it was interesting to kind of see the timing of that.
There's always 2 sides of a story. There's one account, there's another account, and then somewhere in the middle, there's always the truth.
Exactly. You mentioned the secondary. I think it's solid again. Lattimore did have a bounce-back season last year, graded out 10th among corners with at least 400 snaps. Still gives up too many touchdowns. Paulson Adebo was the 3rd-round rookie, got thrown into the fire the first game. He struggled mightily early. Did finish the season with 5 straight games with a positive coverage grade. So that's something to think about as we head into year 2. Marcus May, Tyrann Mathieu at safety were great value signings. Both of their contracts combined are less than what Jamal Adams is making. Rumor has it the chemistry between Mathieu and May is growing rapidly throughout camp. To me, you look at May, so underrated. 3 elite seasons from 2018 to 2021 before getting injured last season. You have Gardner Johnson, who's going to man the slot. You look at how Dennis Allen plays his defense. They're either in dime or nickel on 83% of snaps. So, that secondary depth is important. They brought back Bradley Roby and PJ Williams. They went out and drafted Alante Taylor, a corner from Tennessee, with the 49th pick. So there's some pieces there, and I'm just hearing in camp that the secondary has been very good. This is, to me, a fun defense, right? They're aggressive, lots of personalities. They're going to talk to you a little bit, play lots of man coverage. They let you know that your mom and your sister are pretty ugly. That's just their vibe. Okay.
I'm glad you sanitized some of the language that CJ Gardner Johnson has been known to use out there on the football field. Thank you.
Yes. This was the number 1 defense in first down efficiency allowed and early down success rate allowed. Now, it would be nice if the Saints limited the explosive passes better. They were 20th in that regard, but giving up chunks kind of goes with the territory of being this aggressive in coverage. But I think for the Saints to be elite defensively, right, like Marshawn Lattimore's projecting, regression can't hit. The Saints only allowed touchdowns on 43% of red zone trips. That was 7% better than the second best defense. Saints are also going to see an uptick in schedule of offenses faced, right? In terms of yards per play, the Saints face a top 5 schedule of offenses this season compared to a bottom 10 schedule last season. But this is very, very much an interesting team. This was a buy-on team all summer. Again, going over 7.5 wins. It's now why we're at 8.5, partly because of the continuity, partly because of the buy-in, partly because the NFC looks like there's room for a team that's kind of middling to make a leap.
There's no doubt if the apple cart is going to be upset in the NFC South this year, the New Orleans Saints could be the team leading that particular charge. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there. But most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. You'll, of course, see plenty of news updates, schedule alerts, and what have you, and all the details to get into the Bet the Board football free roll contest just in time for the start of the NFL regular season. Last, Payne, but certainly not least, in the NFC South is the defending champions, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And they sit at plus 750 on the odds board at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the Super Bowl this year. They're minus 270 to win the division, and their win total hung at 11.5. You do need to lay $1.25 if you want to go under the total. And much like the New Orleans Saints, we're going to see a change at the top as far as the Bucs food chain is concerned, but there is obviously a little bit more stability at the quarterback position. When you look at Tom Brady returning after much speculation, it means he's now the longest tenured quarterback in the entire division. Since Brady has arrived at Tampa, the only team averaging more points per game in their home contest is actually the Dallas Cowboys. But Tom Brady created all sorts of news and wrinkles for the last 10 days. That kind of reached a head on Saturday night with the UFC discussion with Dana White and Rob Gronkowski. So when you look at Tom Brady, we can get to the X's and O's. Amid all the speculation, Tom locked and loaded for another football season and a chance to win an 8th Super Bowl down there on the Gulf Coast of Florida, in your opinion?
It's a good question. I think you're probably right. Needs to be more of a overarching general conversation than finding out, what the backup guard is in this situation. There's, to me, a lot of missing pieces from the Buccaneers that we've grown accustomed to the last few years. You just kind of go over this entire roster, and it's like Alex Kappa signed with the Bengals. Ali Marpet retires at age 28. Gronk retires a second time. JPP and Sue became cap casualties. Antonio Brown, did his best Jack Nicholson impersonation and one flew over the cuckoo's nest. All of these things, right? Ryan Jensen suffered a serious knee injury. We just saw Aaron Stinney tear his ACL and MCL Saturday night. Chris Godwin is going to miss a portion of this season after having surgery in January. You have Todd Bowles moving from his best position as a great number 2 and defensive coordinator to the captain's chair, where he's won 38% of his games as a head coach. Your hope is that Bowles kind of lets Brady and Leftwich do their thing, just keep focused on defense along with being, a motivator. Then you have a handful of other guys that Bowles claims is going to return soon, right? Russell Gage injured his leg. No timetable. Mike Evans pulled a hamstring. Tristan Wirfs has an oblique strain. And then even with Tom Brady nearing his return, he's missed multiple weeks of camp. What are you getting out of? Sure, we might see if Kyle Trask can play, but what is that helping you towards the start of this season? It's not. And from a continuity standpoint, you pair these injuries and departures and disruptions with the Buccaneers having the second most difficult schedule in the NFL the first 4 weeks. The goal for Tampa out of the gates has to be just, tread water early. Can we get to week 7, 4-3, or hell, even 3-4? Now, kind of going back to the comment about Bowles not messing with Brady and Leftwich, I mean that in the sense of, defensive-minded head coach that doesn't typically mesh with an offense that throws passes at the highest rate on first down like the Buccaneers do. And you hope that the Buccaneers' early down pass rate continues because Tampa was the number one schedule-adjusted offensive efficiency on early downs. And we know that if you can build leads, it's going to help your defense. But let's hope Todd Bowles understands that, And then you look, and while the schedule of opposing defenses does get easier after being the second toughest last season, still a difficult schedule, especially with all of the injuries mentioned, right? Tampa faces a top 7 schedule of passing defenses, rushing defenses, and pass rushing defenses. I think the latter is important to think about because of some of those O-line guys we mentioned either getting injured or departing. I like Donovan Smith and Tristan Wirfs. Could be arguably the best tackle tandem in the league. Shaq Mason was probably the steal trade of the offseason. I mean, we're talking 6 straight premium seasons of guard play for Shaq. Grayed out the 4th best again last season. Where the problem lies is up the middle, right? Robert Hainsey is projected to start at center with Ryan Jensen down. He was the 3rd-round pick last year, played 31 snaps. I don't know what he's going to be. You look at the starting guard next to him, it's a rookie in Luke Gadecki. He's a tackle converting to guard. He's making a leap from playing the likes of Bowling Green in the MAC to the NFL, and I'm hearing he's holding up well as a run blocker, but he's struggling in pass protection. And then you look at the game the other night, look at some of the data, you look at some of the film. 2 holding penalties, gave up a sack against the Titans' 2nd and 3rd stringers. I would not rule out Tampa signing a free agent interior lineman as early as this week. So look for that. It's just wild to see this unfold. The Buccaneers offensive line last season, super healthy. And then regression just clobbered them at once. Last season, the O-line had its starting 5 play 88% of snaps. Only 4 teams in the league had the same starting 5 play more than 50% of snaps together. So that regression is just hitting immediately. I know Tom Brady controls most of this, right? He's stickler for detail. He's buttoned up. But if this were any other offense, we'd be talking about situational regression, right? Tampa finished number 1 in red zone offense, number 3 in 3rd down offense. Does that continue with some of these missing parts? I know the NFC landscape's a mess. I think the hope and the saving grace for Brady and the Buccaneers is, again, tread water early, surge late, get into the playoffs, make another run. But it feels different this season. I can't quite get myself to do it. But I can tell you, right, the guys that I speak with that are sharp and have influence in this market did bet something on the Buccaneers win total, and the only direction they bet it was under 11.5 time.
And you know what the other interesting thing is, too? We know some shops have yes, no on odds to win the division, and we've seen the price on the no for the Tampa Bay Bucs go from plus upwards of $2 weeks ago, and that number had dropped as low as plus 170 at last check. So awfully interesting as people are looking for different ways to go about trying to fade Tampa, whether it's the win total, whether it's the division market. And while you have plenty of questions...
Interesting way to bet that, right? I mean, the Saints were like over $3. So
yeah, I mean, I guess it's...
They must think Carolina surges or something?
Yeah, I mean, you can cover yourself that way, or if you see movement there, I think it's kind of yes, no. So it's a fascinating way to obviously go about approaching a variety of things, because if you could bet Carolina at 15-1, you could back up New Orleans at 3-1, rather than trying to come in over the top and, betting Atlanta at 30-1, who we don't think will play a role. You mentioned some of the cap casualties for this team defensively. They do make some additions specifically on their defensive line that could pay dividends from day one. Akeem Hicks comes over from the Bears. They pick up Logan Hall in the draft, Logan Ryan in the back end. And this is a group, especially at the linebacking position, who we've seen complement each other quite nicely, with Devin White, who wants to be more of a downhill guy and utilize his athleticism, and Levante David, a 3-time All-Pro, who is typically more accustomed to being an elite linebacker linebacker in coverage. What do you make of Tampa's defense, especially if the offense struggles, given that increased difficulty of schedule that you mentioned?
Yeah, we started to see the defense dip a little bit last year. Tampa went from 5th to 9th in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency, and it might not sound like much, but you could start to see cracks, right? You could see specific areas within crater a little bit. And in 2020, this Buccaneers defense was basically just the immovable object up front. But Tampa went from 1st to 12th in schedule-adjusted run defense year over year. So we saw that dip. I think their hope is Akeem Hicks comes in, regains the dominance that he was, that he had as a run defender. There was this 4-season stretch from 2016 to 2019 where Hicks was one of the league's elite run stoppers. In 2018, Hicks had a tackle on 16% of run plays, just a monster number. You pair him with Vita Vea, feels like a big man cheat code, right? Like 700 pounds of mass up the middle. You add rookie Logan Hall into the mix, who's
a lot of
bulked
beef.
up 25 pounds. Yeah, they're going to move him inside in that 3-down set. So apparently Logan Hall has put on about 25 pounds since his final game at Houston. Secondary took a step back when you put in the context of facing the very easiest schedule of passing offenses last season. The first 12 games, the Buccaneers were 24th in third down conversions allowed, top 10 the year prior against a much tougher schedule. So that area of the defense dwindled a little bit as well. Overall, Tampa played the easiest schedule of offenses last season. Now they project to face the 12th toughest schedule. There's going to be, ring rust, so to speak, not having seen live bullets since 2020, but the Buccaneers defense also has to play against Deshaun Watson. This is just, to me, like if they didn't play in the NFC, this team's a total fade. And teams and guys are still fading them despite that playing in the NFC. I don't know here. Like we always expect when I look at Todd Bowles to have a solid defense, and I expect no different this year, right? On the surface, he's very aggressive. He does some things in disguise that I like. If you look at the Buccaneers, they play with like 2 or 3 down linemen on 85% of snaps. Bowles really disguises things well, and he'll show us off front and then send heat. And that's kind of the, he looks like he's not an aggressive defense pre-snap, and then all of a sudden he's league high 41% blitz rate. He just comes at you. It's really good. He's a really good defensive mind. I think with an uptick of offenses and quarterbacks, when you look at the quality this season and the schedule of offensive lines projected to be top 10, you wonder if Bowles can send as much pressure without seeing an increase in more explosives given up through the air. So that's something I think you want to look at a little bit. Ideally, Tampa's getting more natural pressure this year. We saw Shaq Barrett's sack number decline last season, but he did finish top 15 in pressure rate among edge rushers, had more than a 14% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. Joe Tyron needs to make that year 2 leap on the other side. You look at Tryon, had a 9% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. Most of it was seeing single blocks. The rest of his game was miserable. Graded out 80th of 133 qualifying edges in run defense. Graded out 117th out of 123 edges in tackling. You look at the roster, you start to wonder where the edge depth is. William Golston isn't that guy. We saw last week Tampa brought back Carl Nassib, so it tells me it's an area that they're a little bit concerned about. Levante David has to stay healthy. He's approaching 33 years old, but he is the pulse of this defense. The Buccaneers splits with David on and off the field are just staggering. And without Levante David, and this is going to sound like a hot take to some because I know he's the 5th overall pick, but without Levante David, Devin White might not be in this league anymore. The data suggests the only redeeming quality Devin White has on a football field heading into year 4 is the ability to get pressure from the linebacker position. He does that well. 26% pressure rate on pass rush snaps the last 2 seasons. Todd Bowles is kind of fed up with him to the point where he basically said, just go get the quarterback and fly around, and Levante David will cover up all of your glaring deficiencies. If you look at Devin White with how he's graded out, I mean, he is not even a backup linebacker. It's that bad. Basically, when I look at the Bucs, there's an overview here, and it's, with all of the guys gone or injured, and what appears to be like the most important player not being 100% focused on football, you couldn't pay me to bet the Buccaneers over 11.5. At the same time, right? Like I'm not trying to catch the falling knife and hope Tom Brady's demise happens for the first time in 23 seasons, especially when I look at the NFC landscape. That's kind of where I'm at with Tampa. I'm not really doing anything with them.
You know, it's pretty wild because we never obviously like to paint with broad strokes around here since everything is fluid in the betting market. You try and figure out if a valuation attached to a given team is fair or foul. And everything that we've talked about for Tampa would create more questions than answers. And yet, obviously, because we've seen the shifting in balance of power to the AFC from an overall parity standpoint and depth, that Tampa can still remain second favorites at FanDuel to win the Super Bowl, despite us talking about him as a team that we would be stunned if they went out there and won 13 games, maybe more so than if they happen to finish in that 9-8 range with that increased schedule difficulty, with the changes at head coach, amongst other things. So no doubt about it, it'll be fascinating to see how the market prices Tampa, not just early on in the season, but week in, week out, if we start to see kinks in the armor, either from this team on the offensive or defensive side. Again,
here's kind of like, just again, kind of finalizing this.
Sure.
The phrase "catching the falling knife" is one that you are well familiar with your family history, right? And that's something that's like, yeah, that's great. You hit it maybe once. It's not the most prudent investment strategy. And that's kind of like, I don't really want to do that with Tom Brady in the NFC landscape this year. But again, if people are betting it, they're betting it under 11.5. The interesting element that we've seen, and everything we have said has come full circle, and I own a little bit of this action, right? We saw week 1, under 52.5, based upon the offensive line struggles, the receiver positions being banged up, Tom Brady missing camp for 2 weeks. The defense, we think, yes, it sees an uptick in schedule strength, but should be good, at least early on. And then we talked about Dallas being a fade team. So that's something that we've kind of, when you're mentioning the Buccaneers week to week, something to think about early in the season.
And you mentioned the falling knife. To your point, it's not great in the investment markets. It's not a great way to go about approaching your sports betting either. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Again, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. All of the contest details right there at your fingertips. And Payne, we only have 8 teams left to go. We've done the East. We've done the North. We've done the South. There is light at the end of the preview tunnel. But before we put a bow on all things NFC South this fine morning, wasn't sure if there was an investment opportunity to be made either with these teams or elsewhere in the National Football League.
Let's go with another season-long player prop that we like. Najee Harris under 1,200.5 rushing yards. And a few things interest me here, right? Like, I don't see material improvement from the Steelers' offensive line that finished 30th in run block win rate. We're kind of seeing that in the preseason as well. The second element here is the Steelers go from facing the 7th easiest schedule of run defenses to a projected top 5 schedule this season, and Najee only averaged 3.6 a carry last year. Third thing that stands out to me is both the receiving weapons and quarterbacks, okay, with Pickens emerging to pair with Deontay and Claypool and Freiermuth. There's more of a reason to pass, and when Pittsburgh does pass, I think they chew up more yards because Big Ben finished 37th out of 38 qualifying quarterbacks in intended air yards. That number, I think, increases, right? Whether it's like Maserati Mitch or it's Pickett. But the biggest thing here for me is Najee hit exactly 1,200 rushing yards last season. He played 84% of offensive snaps, was second in total carries. If you've done some reading, the Steelers have flat out said they want to lighten Najee's workload. Najee himself was quoted as saying, "I will not be on the field for certain plays. It's all about being smart, so I understand where the Steelers' offensive coaches are coming from." Under 1,200.5 rushing yards for Najee Harris this year.
I can't wait. I can't wait for more of the Benny Snell experience. I know that's what every Steelers fan looks forward to. When you're talking about taking the ball away from Najee. But to your point, the workload he had last year, untenable to try and carry that going forward if he is indeed going to be the bell cow back. So you look for opportunities to decline a little bit. We know efficiency could be a concern, especially for anybody that watched the first half with that Steelers O-line against the Jacksonville Jaguars defensive front over the weekend. Thank you to all of you, our loyal listeners, who have been with us for 5 Power 5 conference previews and now 6 NFL divisions. As always, all of the information is timestamped, readily available for you. So if you just happen to be starting your football prep now, we're not going to judge you, but you can do it in fits and spurts. We know that the start of both the college and pro season is rapidly approaching and want to have all of those resources available at your disposal. Payne, any final parting shots before we get out of Dodge and reconvene on Thursday when we start the Western Expedition?
That's it.
All right, for all of you, thanks as always for tuning in. And with a Najee Harris rushing yardage total prop in hand, hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.